When gamers argue about how games can be pieces of art in themselves, they usually point to a very specific kind of game. A game that has visually impressive art, is thematically rich, has cinematically composed shots, and of course, something that's philosophically loaded. And for almost 2 decades, that game has been Bioshock. The game came out back in 2007, with you playing as Jack, a plane crash survivor who is dropped into the Atlantic Ocean. He goes into a bathysphere into Rapture, which is a libertarian utopia, free from government, drawn up by industrialist Andrew Ryan. The game promised a world, a civilization, where scientists and artists could pursue greatness without interference. And when you arrive at this said underwater Art Deco city, you realize it is a city in ruins, choked by madmen who have injected themselves with genetic mutations. On top of that, you have little sisters who are harvesting biological material from the corpses and come by with their drill-wielding big daddies, whom you have to survive. The ideology that was promised has somehow eaten itself alive, while the architecture has remained gorgeous. And in the center of it all, there is a twist that completely redefined what video game storytelling could be. So are you surprised that Hollywood has been obsessed with Bioshock? Yeah, me neither. Everything about Bioshock screams visuals. Like, you could literally take a screenshot from the game at random, and you would get the vibes of the story. The themes of the game carried weight beyond the genre, because it argues the Ayn Rand-style objectivism, and we have to sit with the consequences of what happens when philosophy of individual supremacy runs completely unchecked while going through conversations about free will and the nature of choice. And then we are given this reveal that Jack had been psychologically conditioned to follow orders throughout the entire game. So everything that you'd hit as a player so far had been an act of obedience that you too had been manipulated into performing. So are you really playing the game, or is the game playing you? With all of these heavy hitters, people rightfully thought that this would be the game that would cross over, and we would finally get a gut-wrenching movie out. And for years, Hollywood agreed, but then it walked away. So today, we are going to talk about how all of that happened, what went down behind the scenes that led to Bioshock never crossing over. The first ever attempt to put Bioshock on screen happened around 2008. This was when Universal acquired the rights to the game and attached Gore Verbinski to it. Yes, the same Verbinski who had just come off the really popular Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy, which has to be one of the most commercially successful franchise launches in Hollywood history. So in a way, you could say that Universal was swinging for the fences. Not only that, the budget was reported to be around $160 million, and John Logan, the man behind The Aviator and Gladiator, was brought in to develop the script. Production designers also started working. Concept art was generated that you can look up. So all in all, this was a proper movie in development. Now, Verbinski wanted to make the movie into a hard R-rated horror film. And that makes sense, as that way, we could get the brutality and the body horror of it all. Plus, Rapture would feel dangerous, instead of being an aesthetically interesting choice. He was also super committed to the little sisters, the dimensions of Andrew Ryan's storyline, the violence, and overall, the moral complexity of the choices that the game forced on the players. He figured out that there was a way to genuinely honor both the endings that the game could offer. He went on a Reddit AMA and said, "I loved this project when we were getting close to making it at Universal. I was going to dive deep into the Oedipal aspect, and definitely keep it hard R with the little sisters and the choices the protagonist makes, and the consequences. I had worked out a way with writer John Logan to have both endings, and I was looking forward to bringing that to the big screen and really effing with people's heads. Had some great designs for the big daddies, and the entire underwater, demented Art Deco aesthetic. Every year I hear something about the project, but I'm not sure any studio is quite willing to go where I was headed." And that last line is the entire history of the movie in one sentence. The studio looked at the whole R-rated film idea with body horror in it and decided to get cold feet. At the time, The Watchmen had underperformed, and The Golden Compass was a PR nightmare. There was no way they were going to go for the game, as back in the day, dark and expensive R-rated games were still dangerous bets. Because Bioshock at the time was still on the same level as Super Mario Bros. And Doom in the eyes of the Hollywood executives. And let's be real, you don't want Bioshock and Super Mario Bros. In the same breath. The studio then reportedly started to push to move the production out of London, which was Verbinski's preferred base, to save money on costs, and as a result of that compromise, Verbinski fell out of the project. In his place, we got Juan Carlos Fresnadillo, who had directed 28 weeks later. But then, even he was given a reduced budget and reduced creativity, so that by that point, the project was as good as dead, because a movie, to do justice to Bioshock, required more than whatever the studio at the time was willing to give. This is the first collapse. The take-home message from this collapse is that the problem was struck. The movie was dark, philosophical, gritty, and not necessarily something that would please every crowd all around it. So it was basically everything that would make the studio finance department back in 2009 break a sweat. If the Bioshock movie planned by Verbinski were a conversation now, after Last of Us and Joker, then it would have been green. So after not getting the green light, the rights floated around, but nothing visible happened. The game was followed by Bioshock 2 in 2010, where we learned more about Rapture's lore without reaching the same cultural altitude that the original had. Then, in 2013, we got Bioshock Infinite, which took the franchise to this airborne city of Columbia with a completely different aesthetic and a new narrative conversation. Ken Levine, the creator of Bioshock, restructured and shut down Irrational Games in 2014 and moved towards more experimental work with ghost story games, which means the center of gravity around the entire IP got shifted. There was no longer a single creative voice at the top of the franchise, and the rights situation understandably got more and more murky. And in the meantime, the world around the game started to change. We got Game of Thrones, which demonstrated that we would build serialized fantasy narratives for adults, and it would work. Netflix started focusing on its prestige genre content, and as a result, we got Arcane in 2021, which proved that game adaptation could be artistically serious and grounded without being a cash grab. Then we got The Last of Us, which was a zombie apocalypse show with the HBO production values, star power, and a lot of emotional depth. And suddenly, the game that people had dismissed for being too downbeat to work on television became one of the most watched series in HBO's history. So clearly, there was a market for video game adaptations, especially for adults who can handle the gore and blood. With that in mind, in February 2022, Netflix and 2K/Take-Two Interactive announced that a new Bioshock film was in active development. This was a formal partnership between the streamer and the publisher, and this film adaptation was explicitly on the table. The announcement was understandably received with a mixture of excitement and caution, because we have been around for the past 15 years. We know how Bioshock was treated last time. We were not going to fall for the same thing again. But this time, the industrial context was different. See, Netflix has the money, the appetite for prestige genres, and the subscription model that kinda guarantees the viewing. So overall, the holy trifecta on why you should make the movie. Francis Lawrence was attached to direct, and he is someone who has shown he can handle deep topics like this. He has made I Am Legend and has directed the Hunger Games films, including Catching Fire, and overall, everyone knew that if there was a man who could do Bioshock justice, this would be him. Michael Green, the writer behind Logan and Blade Runner 2049, came on board to write the script for the film. Then in 2024, Zach Cregger, the writer and director of the 2022 horror film Barbarian, came on board. Cregger has this innate ability to conceal information and reveal information in a way that feels fresh, without feeling cheap or unearned. And those are the kinds of skills you need to give us that big twist on the big screen. And right when we were getting our hopes up, in May 2026, we learned that Zach Cregger had left the project to direct the new Resident Evil. Not only that, Michael Green has also left the project, and now, as the writer, we have Justin Rhodes, who is well known for Terminator Dark Fate. So clearly, there are a lot of changes happening, and I have a sneaking suspicion it is because of what Roy Lee said before. In 2025, he told Games Radar during a press tour that Netflix wants us to keep everything under wraps, but it's definitely going to be based on the first Bioshock game. He added that the film had been delayed for a little bit while they had to do some more script work, and that as that work continued, Lawrence had been committed to The Long Walk, and then the new Hunger Games prequel. So, from what we can understand, Bioshock was going to be Lawrence's next project after Sunrise on the Reaping was done. Then we come to 2026. Collider spoke with Lee early this year, and what he said was encouraging and yet a little uncertain. We would have gotten it made a few years back, but then other movies got in the way, Lee acknowledged. I know that Netflix and Take-Two are very anxious to see the movie come out because they want to have the release coincide with some of the potential new incarnations of the game. When asked about production timing, he didn't give a straight answer. He said, "It's steadily on the path, but you know how it goes. It's so many things could get in the way, but I know that the intent is to hopefully get in production next year." Say what you want, but that doesn't sound like a green light to me. Now, I will give props where they're due. I appreciate the honesty. The intent behind the project is real, but that doesn't take away from the fact that there are pieces that are moving that are beyond anyone's control. So even though the news is not a happy affirmation, I appreciate that we know where we stand with the movie, and the people involved in the project understand what they are dealing with. Because simply put, Bioshock is far from simple. The "would you kindly" twist tells us everything about Jack and Andrew Ryan and the Rapture, yes, but it also tells us about the relationship between the player and the game, because games manufacture this feeling of agency, even though quietly they direct your behavior. Bioshock hit us there, and that's why it was like a gut punch. If you strip that away, you will have a reveal that's just clever, not devastating. So the film needs to find a way to express the same themes in a medium where the audience is watching and not actively clicking buttons and participating. I am not saying this is impossible, but it is a hard thing to achieve, so it makes sense why script revisions have continued through multiple writers across multiple years. Plus, as years went by, the cost problem also became a thing, you know? Lee acknowledged in 2024 that Netflix has lowered the budgets, and the version Lawrence is now developing is a much smaller film than the epic that Verbinski originally envisioned. And this kind of scope reduction is part of business, but it also raises questions regarding the authenticity of the adaptation. Rapture is not a location that you can do half-assedly. The entire emotional logic of the game depends on the city feeling vast and intricate. Now, if the Rapture looks like a mid-budget extension, then that would take away from the immersive experience. Then you would have to talk about the franchise questions. See, Netflix is never thinking about one-off films. It is always thinking about universes, you know? We have 3 games, each set in a different city with its own distinct visual identity and philosophical occupation. So there's pressure to build groundwork for sequels, leave the doors open, and whatnot, but this kind of attitude is truly corrosive to storytelling. The first Bioshock worked because it ends where it ends. The moment you try to accommodate it with Columbia and Infinite, you are now building a platform and not adapting a game into a movie. In order for Bioshock to even work, it would need to commit to Rapture and the horror. The body horror and the violence have to be there. Any version that softens the drug addiction mechanics or the violence of the big daddies isn't the Bioshock we know and love. The movie would also need to lean into the twist with a real solution. There should be enough emotional impact of the reveal, which would require a lot of groundwork being laid through the visual storytelling and the sound design, etc. Even if it means moving away from the game's exact structure, this needs to be done. Otherwise, the film wouldn't land the way Bioshock did as a game. Lastly, the people behind the scenes would have to treat Bioshock as a self-contained story instead of a franchise launcher. It needs to spend time building Rapture for the horror to fully set in. Anything else would be a diluted version of what could have been. With how the market has changed and audiences have grown, I would say that there is enough external support for this movie to work that Verbinski didn't have back in the day. So now, all that needs to happen is for the people behind the project to work out all the knots and get through it all. I mean, we have directors and writers who understand the horror and know how to work with it. They also have a streamer and a publisher openly eager to time the film's release with the new game content. While none of this means there is going to be a movie, I am saying that all of the frictions that were there are no more. So I would like to hope for a Bioshock movie now rather than later, when the trends and audience tastes might shift again. So, would you kindly, Hollywood? That's it for today's video, guys. Let us know in the comments what you guys are thinking about a Bioshock movie, yay or nay. Like and subscribe as always, and I will see you guys the next time. Bye!